in the workshop this morning. We're going to take a closer look at what all of you came up with now. For that, I'm going to bring up on stage the co-chair of Workshop 3, Renuka Bad, Secretary General of Eurogoose. Let's give her a round of applause.
Thank you very much. I have this amazing opportunity to present to you, back to you, what you've been discussing and producing over the last day and a half, I would say. I hope you've had a good lunch and some coffee, because there's a lot of information coming your way. Can I have the slide 1, please? I will try to go back. Can we have the individual flagship programs displayed on the screen, please? Okay, so I can give you a bit of introduction while that's being sorted out. We had a total of 15 flagship initiatives that have come back from all of you. Within those 15 flagship initiatives, we found a few thematic groupings, and you all picked up on issues which were cross-cutting from many different tables. So what we have done is I will be presenting the 15 flagship initiatives in quick succession, but we will have a little bit more focus on the thematic groupings that we found, and also some of the cross-cutting issues that we found in those flagship initiatives. Okay, thank you. Three of us were preparing these slides. Please excuse us. Okay, so there we go. This is the first slide. And so I'm going to have to go back to those issue slides after I finish this. The first flagship initiative that came up was to reduce uncertainties around sea level rise. We then had the Rossi MPA Research Coordination Network, which is an existing program, but they fleshed it out and made it relevant to the upcoming IPY. The third initiative was the Digital Twin for the Antarctic, another program that is currently being planned, but it is very, very relevant for the upcoming IPY. And this is a public-facing digital tool, which will be very useful for passing the message of the polar conservation issues to the general public. Then we have the community-based Pan-Arctic research to identify good practices for knowledge co-creation. This is suggested as an 8-year project across 8 different Arctic nations to identify the different community needs and the expertise that is required to address all of these issues. This project includes producing guidelines for ethical and meaningful knowledge co-production as well. Then we have the Polar Knowledge for All. This includes creating an inventory of indigenous scientific and citizen science knowledge, and bringing all of the different disparate data libraries together using digital tools, AI-related tools that are available currently. Then we have the poles to coast. How do we connect the polar regions to the rest of the planet? This was one of the interesting proposals that came through. This is projected as a multidisciplinary project mapping the coastal bathymetry and incorporating ice sheet models to provide high-resolution sea level estimates. This also looks at ensuring that the uncertainty levels that are understood can be well projected and utilized for securing the future of our coastal areas. Then we have the ocean stability and planetary health under a bipolar pressure. This is looking at an Earth system scale program to understand how the ice melt at both polar regions affects and reshapes global ocean circulation, the surface weather, and the global food web. This also looks at issues of food security and planetary health in general. Then we have a sustained Pan-Arctic monitoring. This is also something that is being discussed and looked at, but this was taken up and presented as an initiative that can be taken forward up to the IPY for the best benefit of everyone. Then we have the Indigenous IPY5 Secretariat. This is to establish a formal secretariat structure for the indigenous peoples to act as a catalyst for ensuring and integrating indigenous participation in all future IPYs. This is a really essential project for equitable ethics and the decolonization of research carried out in the polar regions. Then we have elevating the human face of climate change. As polar scientists, a lot of us face this issue of how do we pick up the problems in the polar regions and how do we make them relevant for the general public, for whom the polar regions are quite far away. So this project picks up on that aspect, and it focuses on the societal and human impacts of climate change to reconnect the science to lived experiences, making the polar regions closer to the people who live on the rest of the planet who are not connected to the poles. Then we have an educational perspective with the IPY education curriculum. It takes a cradle-to-grave polar literacy approach. This is suggested as a global initiative to create a polar resource book and a toolkit, and it involves everyone from the general public up to the national level ministries to ensure that the message is strong and is given out to all of the schools and the education programs. AI for IPY. I can tell you, we've used AI to a very good effect in this workshop. All of the 3 workshops that have taken place, the 2 yesterday and the 1 today, I don't think all of this analysis would have been possible without the AI tools that even currently exist. I wouldn't be able to show you all of these things if we did not have the AI tools that we used. So I can see some frowns in the audience, and I do kind of agree that there are issues with using AI, but this is the project that is picking up on those topics and ensuring that the data that we use and the AI initiatives that are useful towards IPY are utilized ethically and ensure that we utilize them correctly towards tools such as setting up the digital twin, the polar twin, and to develop new foundational models which will help global planetary health. Then we have a funders summit. So the project suggests gathering investors for better biodiversity, bringing together different funding models, so governmental funding models, private philanthropy, and indigenous peoples together for ensuring ethical and accessible funding for all polar research. Then we have the Polar Early Warning Systems for Global Action. This is the creation of a planetary scale early warning system designed to identify tipping points that will predict the collapse and help warn the rest of the planet of things to come so they can better protect themselves. Then we have global citizenship for the poles. Again, how do we involve the rest of the planet in protecting the polar regions? This is the project that takes that into account. Now we come back to the thematic grouping. So you've heard the 15 global initiatives. Thank you very much for producing those. Some of the thematic groupings that came up within these flagship initiatives, one of the ones that was the biggest was considering planetary risk and climate predictability. We have some areas of the polar regions are called as deserts of knowledge, and the focus of these projects was to try and protect global infrastructure and livelihoods. So there's 4 of the flagship initiatives that were considered under this grouping. Then the next was digital frontiers and data infrastructure. This thematic grouping considered 3 different flagships, and it brings forward the modernizing of the polar science through using AI, virtual twins, and digital and open access tools for all. We then have an important thematic grouping on indigenous leadership and co-production. There were 3 initiatives that looked at this aspect, and they focused on decolonizing research and ensuring ethical, place-based collaborations for polar research. We then have stewardship, conservation, and diplomacy thematic grouping, and there were 3 flagships that looked at this again, and this grouping was trying to get protection of biodiversity and utilizing science to maintain international peace and diplomacy. Then we have the literacy, engagement, and the human dimension. This thematic cluster of 3 projects was reconnecting the global society to the poles through both education and lived experience. Now this is the important aspect. What are the issues that you all came up with? There were several recurring issues. One of the first one was that we have a large amount of data already from many parts of the polar region, but a lot of that data exists in places that cannot be accessed. So in effect, forming a data graveyard. What we need to do first is to try and establish interoperability protocols that make these isolated data graveyards accessible and available to all. We need to optimize the research budgets by eliminating the costly and redundant duplication of effort, and to develop models that can process all of these vast data sets that are different stored in different places and are disparate, bring them together and help to identify global climate patterns. These data access provided also needs to consider data sovereignty issues as well. We then have the issue that was brought up by several flagships of data, ethical digitalization and data sovereignty. As science moves towards AI-generated or AI-driven modeling, as our modeling capabilities improve, as the machine learning tools improve, there is a recurring concern about who owns the data and of data sovereignty and ethical knowledge sharing. So we need to ensure that we codify no harm protocols for the digitalization and storage of traditional knowledge. We have to establish data sovereignty frameworks that ensure that indigenous communities own and control their own digital records. We have to look at AI development in the future, and we must ensure that these AI tools do not replicate the harmful historical biases that exist in knowledge and data at the moment. And then we have to ensure that data archives are decolonized to ensure diverse knowledge systems are given equitable weightage in today's research systems. Then we have issues about trust and social acceptability. There is definitely a recognized crisis of trust between knowledge producers and the public. Again, as researchers, a lot of us have experienced this or have heard stories about this firsthand or secondhand. So we have to ensure that when we integrate qualitative testimonies and oral histories to make all of the climate science that we study much more relatable to the general public, we have to ensure that we are building institutional transparency to counteract the uncertainty narrative that is driven and exploited by climate skeptics. We have to demonstrate the direct impact of the polar climate change on local food systems, on cultural identity, and on daily livelihoods. That's what impacts individuals the most. So if we can show them the impact, they will understand the importance of the polar regions. Then we see something that's close to my heart, science diplomacy as an enabler. We are all aware of the strenuous geopolitical situation that's ongoing in the world at the moment. Several flagships that were produced point to using research and science as a low-stakes vehicle to ensure that we keep all of these international collaborations going, even under geopolitical stress. We can leverage scientific collaborations as a natural gear to sustain dialogue between nations that are geopolitically at odds. Sorry. We have to adapt governance models that are inspired by international entities that are represented in the crowd today, like SCAR, that operate with the professional weight of international or UN-style organizations. These organizations tend to work on consensus-building mechanisms, and so they have to ensure that everyone's views are taken into account before decisions are made. Maintaining the Rossi MPA as a primary case study for international consensus building through environmental conservation. The Rossi MPA is an amazing example of how the community can get together, even if they are at odds with each other. And then we have ensuring polar science remains a key de-escalation tool by focusing on shared planetary risks rather than national interests. And I think the final slide is, how do we bring the poles to the people? A recurring mandate for researchers today is to move away from research for research's sake. We have to utilize language that is accessible and understandable by the general public, the public that funds a lot of our research. We have to reframe issues on deep uncertainty as active risk management, because that's what it is. We have to ensure that abstract sea level projections, which are not understandable even to some scientists, into actionable, accessible bathymetric data for coastal urban planners. We have to communicate the tangible economic consequences of climate change in the polar regions and the effects that it brings to the rest of the planet. Economic changes that are easier understood by the general public. We have to empower decision makers with tailor-made projections that relate the polar melt directly to the resilience of the local infrastructure that they represent. Finally, how do we bring this all together? How do we ensure that all of these flagship initiatives that you have produced can get funded? We have to ensure that we are bringing in different models of funding, that we move away from just the national funding models that a lot of countries follow, but bring in impact investors, philanthropists, and other organizations that are interested in funding polar research. We have to ensure that we are connecting the corporate ESG commitments directly to polar issues like polar biodiversity. And we have to institutionalize examples like the Funders Summit to coordinate philanthropic, national, and private investment streams effectively. That brings me to the end of the presentation. I hope that coffee has worked and all of the dense knowledge given to you just now. I just want to remind you that the information that was presented will be made available to all of you in the form of a detailed report. So don't stress if you've missed some slides. You will still get all the information sent to you in a nicely digestible format. Thank you very much.
Renuka, thank you so much. That was a good job done in a very short amount of time. So thank you so much again to Renuka Bad for those conclusions for Workshop 3. We're now going to take a deeper dive on some concrete examples of moving from research to action, looking particularly at the situation in the Central Arctic Ocean. For this, I'd like to invite up two participants, please, two people who could talk about their very own practical experience in this domain. Would you please welcome Becca Robbins-Gisclair, Senior Director of Arctic from Ocean Conservancy, and Pierre Mianville, Advocacy Officer for the Tara Ocean Foundation. Come on up. So welcome to both of you. Pierre, I'm going to start with you. So for those of you who don't know, the Tara Polar Station is this innovative drifting research platform designed to study Arctic change, including the Central Arctic Ocean. There's actually a maquette of Tara that's just outside on the right. You can take a look at it if you like after we're done today. And you're now actually working with a consortium on a new scientific program that's called Tara Polaris 1, which is planning its first Arctic drift for this summer. Just start with that. Tell us a bit more about that project and what your hopes are.
Yes, thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon to you all. I would just like to start by thanking His Highness Prince Albert II for his support for this project, because it's thanks to him through his contribution via the Prince Albert II Foundation and Monaco Explorations that this boat has been built. So yeah, as you were saying, it's first of its kind vessel. It's not really a vessel. It's more a scientific drifting platform. It's meant to be caught voluntarily in the ice, and it's really a long-term scientific program that we have, because we're going to plan expeditions for the upcoming 20 years, transdisciplinary, of course. And the idea is really to witness this regime change in the Central Arctic Ocean that we're going to know in the upcoming 20 years, because we are talking about legacy. And we're going to be the last generation that will be able to study this constantly iced ocean, because in 2040 there won't be ice, most probably in the summer. So yeah, that's the plan.
So specifically, what kind of data is it exactly, and how does it all work?
So there are going to be all kinds of data in a way. It's very transdisciplinary. We have physics, genomics, of course, biogeochemistry, And you can compare it a bit to the International Space Station in a way that there are going to be only 12 people on board during the winter. So they are all going to work for the more than 100 people working from land and the 40 labs involved in the Terra Polaris consortium. And so you have some examples here. Those images are a month old from the test that we've made in the Baltic Sea this winter.
So we've been talking, obviously, all about going from research to action. Becca, of course, that makes me bring you in now. How can this kind of science that is being developed on Tara at the moment best help contribute to precautionary protection of the Central Arctic Ocean?
Thank you. And before I start, I do want to also echo the thanks to the Foundation for the invitation and for hosting this important conversation and feature on the Central Arctic Ocean. I'm with Ocean Conservancy, and we're an NGO, and so our focus is always how do we take this science and turn it into making a difference in the world and for our oceans. And I think when I think about the Central Arctic Ocean and the data that will be collected on Terra, I think we've heard a lot throughout the conversations in the past few days about science as diplomacy, as a safe space for collaboration, and I think we're seeing that now more than ever in the Central Arctic Ocean. And of course, the basic premise of the precautionary approach that we've taken with the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement in the Central Arctic Ocean and hope to expand to other actions is really learn first and act later. And so developing the science and the knowledge that we need to know what those impacts are going to be and be able to make informed decisions down the road is really critical.
Okay, so what about then going even further? How can this scientific knowledge actually translate into governance impact?
Yeah, I think so. The scientific knowledge, there's a few ways. Again, I think it's really critical and essential to the precautionary approach to do that science. And then I think what we're seeing already in the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement, that there are very specific decision points in a mechanism like the Fisheries Agreement. For instance, what are the vulnerable marine ecosystems that we want to protect? Where is the critically important ice habitat? And so I think the science here is a really important piece. I also want to underscore, I think, that in terms of governance, there's also an opportunity for sort of changing that paradigm as well for how Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous people are part of the process, and really ensuring that there is equitable and meaningful engagement from the outset, too.
Earlier, when we were heading into the previous workshop, Gary was saying to all of you, you've got to think about what the funders are thinking. You've got to think about what the politicians are thinking. How much do the people on Tara, the researchers on Tara, think about that kind of governance impact down the line?
For sure, most of them are not part of the policy framework world, I would say, but they are very interested in knowing how their science are going to be useful to society. So we have very good discussions about that, how to operationalize the data, what kind of indexes, relevant indicators we can build together. But from now, we have also this big challenge of making this work first also. So this is mostly our concern right now, but we are thinking about the rest for the 20 years to come, for sure.
Beck, is there any advice that you would give to researchers or scientists to think more long-term about impact?
Yeah, this is, I think, a question, as someone mostly on the policy side and not on the science side, I think this is something we wrestle with all the time. And really thinking, I think in many ways, the way we see science come into the world is making sure that it has an influence on actions. And so making sure, that the science is relevant to those decision points. And more importantly, in the step I think we often miss is making sure that there's actually a pathway for that science to make its way into management decisions on the ground.
So obviously the big focus of the final workshop is how to build a bridge between science and action, conservation, impact. I just want both of your points of views. What is the biggest roadblock to all of that at the moment? And what's the one thing that really needs to happen to truly build that bridge? So let's start with the roadblocks first. I don't know who wants to go first. Go ahead. Oh, go ahead, Pierre.
Well, we are the last afternoon, so I think I'll say nothing new that hasn't been said before, but there's at least two major international roadblocks. The first one being the deterioration of the international cooperation in the region, And with that, the second, I think, is the emerging opportunities that the ice melt is leading to. And so, do you want me to stop on the roadblocks? Or
Yeah, I'm curious to get Becca's notion of what the biggest roadblock is at the moment. First.
Yeah, and I think it's hard to give any other answer right now than sort of the geopolitics and security issues that are sort of drowning out everything else in the room. And so I think coming to a place where we can come back to the real problems that we're facing. I think I've heard a few people in the room say, you know, we have all these issues going on, but climate change is really still the biggest threat facing the Arctic. And so coming back to that place and addressing that biggest threat, even amongst all the other noise, I think is really key.
Right, so then that obviously comes to the flip side of all this. So what is the key thing? I mean, how do you make that conversation happen?
I think I will agree, of course, with what Becca said about building on existing framework. I think CAOFA offers quite a unique chance to innovate on that matter. And also, I'll point out that we need to keep on believing and working for international cooperation. Even if it's bad, it's better than nothing. So I'll push that way, and also saying that on our perspective as a project leader, financing is quite a big challenge for sure. So we need to get the money in the science. For us, for example, those 20 years, this 20 years program is approximately 100 million. So we need to find long-term financing. We've been talking about this yesterday and today. So
yeah. Becca, just to wrap up.
Yeah, I think, you know, we've heard a lot of great ideas in this room, I think over the last few days, of how we sort of regrow that connection to what is so important and making sure that we maintain the focus on climate change and the impacts that people are feeling. But I would also, you know, just point to continuing not letting everything that's happening in the world sort of drown out the good things that are happening and that are working. And there, again, I would also point to the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement, where we are seeing you know, the Arctic and non-Arctic nations are all still at the table and really moving forward with this precautionary approach, which is kind of remarkable given where things stand right now. And I think hoping to see that model improve and grow and as we look towards the future of the Central Arctic Ocean.
Thank you so much. Becca Robin-Gisclair and Pierre Mianville. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. All right, we're going to keep trying to look toward the future, look toward positive solutions now with our final panel of this third Polar Symposium. Now, this closing session will bring together the chairs or the co-chairs of each of the three workshops for a collective reflection on the key insights and the outcomes of this symposium. We really hope we will get all of you excited about the impact and the legacy of the Polar Initiative as we move toward the 5th International Polar Year and beyond. So for that, would you please welcome on stage again, Dr. Ranucca Bad, Secretary General of Eurogoose. Also with us, Dr. Jennifer Spence, Director of the Arctic Initiative at the Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs. Dr. Narelle van der Velde, Head Cryosphere Monitoring Prediction and Services Unit at the World Meteorological Organization. And your moderator for this session, Dr. Alice Guzzi, Vice President, Association of Polar Early Career Scientists. Thank you.
So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the closing panel. So, during this panel, you will have a chance to ask the question. So, think about what you would like to ask them as we hear about our opening reflection. So now, speaking to the three of you, each of you, as a panelist, has also led the workshop addressing complementary dimension of polar research. And now you will help us to move these outcomes one step further by placing them within a forward-looking perspective toward the 5th International Polar Year. I will first invite each of you to reflect on the key outcomes of your workshop before we're moving into the shared discussion. So Jennifer, would you like to start?
I don't have to do anything. You know, there's been, I think, both Renuka, I think you did an absolutely fabulous job. I sat over there and went, okay, wow, that was really impressive. So workshop 1 seems really far away right now. But I think there's real alignment, what I'm hearing. I mean, we saw some core messages coming out in terms of that big picture, where do we want to go from here? And I think, I mean, what really stands out to me is the differentiation between the narratives of what is happening right now and what's important. And we heard the drowning out, for lack of a better word, of some of the things that are important, to what's really happening on the ground, and acknowledging all the work that is happening and really elevating that, and using IPY as a lever to do that. I think that's an incredibly important message that came out. What really also struck me is this idea of trust building, bridging, making connections, and for me, that's all about sustaining collaboration, recognizing that the type of work that is done in the poles cannot be done without collaboration. So if we lose that norm of collaboration in the Arctic, then sorry, that's my bias hitting right there, and the Antarctic. There we go. In the poles, if we lose that culture and those norms, then we're not going to get where we need to go. That's simply where it is. And then the last piece that I really want to do, and I think Renuka did a really important job or a valuable way of expressing this, is the human dimension. And making this real for people. And for me, that is grounded, and this I will speak specifically to the Arctic context, and ensuring that the needs and interests of Indigenous peoples in these spaces is recognized, their leadership is recognized, their role in advancing both research and the translation of that into what it means for policy priorities. Those were all messages that we heard in the first workshop. There were a lot more. And then my last point is really about that future orientation. That we heard it. I did have a chance to watch the video from the first panel that I wasn't able to see. Is, you know, the sort of logic of don't let a good crisis go to waste. That there are opportunities for innovation. There are opportunities to really reflect on how we can do things differently. And we need to look at it with that orientation in order to really move things forward.
Thank you very much. And Narelle, do you want to? Well,
yeah, I must reflect that this has been an incredible process. It feels a little bit like the Grand Prix at the end here, with us trying to madly write down all these notes. But I think when we reflect back on those 15 proposals that you just poured your souls into over the last few hours, there's some amazing things in there that could actually become, you know, IPY projects going forward. So first of all, I want to congratulate everyone in the room for all the hard work, because I think we can use that going forward. I think there were sort of 3 things that I really wanted to think about. The first one was around structure. Every time we talked, it came back to data. It came back to having information. And I know right now we don't have that data in the right formats or structures, and it's fragmented. And really, this is something we're going to have to think very carefully about early, because if it's not in place by the time the IPY starts, we're going to have issues with what to do with the data that comes out of it and how to actually do the work. So this is something that's really struck me. Then a second thing, you know, sort of what you were saying too about every voice matters for this IPY, and this co-design and really bringing everybody to the table is going to be essential. And again, it's early and often. So that struck me as sort of the second thing which I've taken away from this. And lastly, I think one thing is that we have an enormous opportunity here, especially given these geopolitical times, to use this International Polar Year to advocate for our science diplomacy, to advocate for peace, to advocate for mitigation, to advocate for adaptation that's sensible and is grounded in science. And I think that is our responsibility, and we should not take that lightly either.
Thank you very much. And now Renuka for workshop number 3.
I think have to do something. Can you hear me? Okay, great. I've just given you a 20-minute lecture on the key outcomes of my workshop, so I will focus my energies on just one. I think Jennifer and Narelle have provided a really good summary of some of the outcomes that we already saw and discussed. I think what struck out for me really is ensuring that a diversity of voices are heard. The crisis that we're experiencing is affecting everyone on the planet. The nations that are polar nations and the nations that are not polar nations. So we have to ensure that a diversity of opinions and voices is heard to make sure that we solve this crisis that is affecting all of us. Thanks.
Thank you. And now we would like to open the conversation to all of you. So, of course, Renuka already gave us like an overview of the different flagship initiatives, and they are all valuable for society in the context of the IPY5. What are your reflections, and what should be the next step after this symposium? So, yeah, I think it is. Yeah, so you should go.
So I'm going to be very provocative, and let's start with, we're going to ask one person from each table, and then I'm going to pick on somebody, and because I know Rob is right in front of me, I'm going to start with you. 10 minutes, yep. Okay, I can give him one. Yeah. You can do one thing right now with infinite amount of money. Yeah, like right now to prepare for the IPY. What would you do?
Solve the sea level problem. But I will reflect on one thing that I've been a little frustrated about, not seeing this word up on the screen as much as it could have been, is the word mitigation. And science to action should include impact on policy. And without mitigation, the oceans will continue to acidify. That is something that's very difficult to protect. Once the CO2 is in the atmosphere, that's a difficult, even geoengineering problem. So mitigation, to me, in addition to, of course, informed information that is actionable in terms of adaptation, of course, is incredibly important, but the co-benefit of mitigation is something that I hope comes out louder and clearer in our final reporting.
Thank you very much. So, there are any other question, or I have a provocative one for you? Oh, there it is.
Hi there, Sian Henley from the University of Edinburgh, and linked to the Southern Ocean Observing System as well. So on Wednesday, we heard about the International Antarctic Initiative. There was also lots of talk of the University of the Arctic. And then we went into the business of the Polar Symposium, and I feel like we lost the thread of UArctic and the IAI that we started with, and more broadly, the role of education. So your one word was mitigation, mine would have been education. So my question for whoever would like to pick it up is what the role of pre-university education is in forging the success of the IPY, noting that kids who are between 10 and 15 now will be university students and PhD students when the IPY comes around.
I just want to give you an answer and an experience. I was part of the first Apex from the last IPY, and we went into schools. And I think that was some of the most rewarding work that I did as part of that, because you really saw their faces glow when they would hear it, in this case about the Antarctic, but I think probably around the Arctic too. I think it's critical right the way through, and we talked about it in one of our groups, right the way through from primary school, embedding this in curricula right the way through. There are different actors to connect that to, but I think it's absolutely essential at every level of education.
I agree with you. I think education is critical. What I would say is I think we need to reflect on how we do that education. And so I think the schools are important, but I think we're working with a generation that now there are multiple ways to reach and educate, and so we should be thinking of innovative tools in this context to sort of reach that generation, and not just sort of your traditional educational curriculum kind of based, but there's a real opportunity here to do really engaging and the ability to share stories and to have experiences without necessarily needing to travel to places. These are things these are powerful things that the polls offer because they're on the front lines of things like climate change that we can, and so we shouldn't just sort of fall to our traditional forms of education.
I have a little example of these non-traditional tools. I've never visited the Shackleton's hut, but the Antarctic Heritage Trust has this amazing AI experience, virtual reality experience, that takes you straight into those huts. And it was so realistic. I visited the Antarctic, but never that far inland. It was so realistic, and I could see the people who were participating in that after me get really emotional because they knew the story of the explorer, and they were able to participate in this and kind of almost touch that building that he had stayed in. And it stayed with them over the course of that event that we were there. So you have these huge impact initiatives that are not essentially very high. You don't need a huge amount of effort to make these things, but these initiatives can have a huge amount of impact, which carries through from childhood onwards, and it kind of reframes their experience of the polar world.
Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to hear all of this as a representative of HAPEX today. So, do we have any other question? Oh, okay. This will be our last one. So,
I'm sorry that it's not actually a question, it's more a comment. I really want to compliment the foundation and the Polar Initiative because I found this symposium really useful. The discussion, this workshop structure, very useful discussion with comments that are constructive. And yeah, so really my comment is actually to build up on what has been done today. So not just the report, but if there would be an occasion to actually continue this work, because especially for the flagship initiatives, it's a hard work to come up with ideas, and then, the second sheet was all implementation, how to do the coordination work, how to find the funding, who are the actors. It's a huge work, and of course you cannot come up with this in 2 hours. Also, it was the last workshop, so we were all tired. So I think these ideas, we should find a way to build up on this and come up again with all these results and discuss again together. Also to filter them, to see which one are really feasible, how to actually build on them, the structure of coordination, which could be the actual hybrid innovative funding models that we could work on. And also this can be an exercise to actually see this is very good, we need to we continue to work it on, this as a second priority, and so forth. So I really wish there is a continuation for this, maybe before the 2 years. But so thank you again. I really appreciated this discussion these days.
thank you. And Jennifer?
I just want to say, and I think Solomon and I were talking about this briefly this morning, when I come to these events, and I think it's the same for a lot of you, I don't come in order to be part of a report. I come here to be part of advancing these conversations into action, which was ultimately the vision for this particular conference. So I very much agree. I mean, what I will be looking for in that report is hooks into my own organization, but also collaborations with others to actually continue to advance the work, because the things that come out of a multidisciplinary group like this, I don't need to sit in my office and come up with priorities for my organization. I'd much rather follow the thoughts and perspectives of a mixed and thoughtful group like this and say, okay, this is where I can pick up and this is where I can contribute. So I absolutely echo that, and I thank the Prince Albert Foundation as well, so thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And our time is running out, so I would like to thank all of you for this conversation. And please join me for a very warm round of applause for our panelists and also all of you for your work.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you so much to all four of our panelists. Thank you very much. All right, we have a treat for you now. We have a little bit of a musical interlude. We're going to have a musical performance from a very talented yoiker. A yoiker, of course, is a performer of traditional music of the indigenous Sami people in Northern Europe. So instead of singing about something in particular, a yoiker evokes the essence of a person or an animal or a place through an often personal song that makes the subject feel truly present. So we're now going to welcome singer, songwriter, yoiker, and the winner of the 2025 Sami Grand Prix. Would you please welcome with me, Oscar? Okay. Just 2 minutes, they're going to quickly set up.